A Young Princess, written by Steve A. Hall, narrated by Ella Whitehead. Chapter 2. There was a royal family. There was a royal family who lived in a castle. With daily banquets, their guests would be dazzled. However, tonight's banquet, despite being an important one, would probably have a somber mood to it after the events of the day. A few hours earlier, 2 royal guards assigned to protect the village of Norwalk sent word that they had engaged in a sword fight with 2 rebels, defeating them and taking them into custody. What was most disturbing about this news to King Charles was that there had been a 3rd rebel involved, and that the rebel escaped with a 1-year-old boy who belonged to a peasant family. King Charles didn't care much for peasants, but he did have a heart, and he felt for this poor family in Norwalk. Upon hearing this news, the king dispatched a whole band of royal guards to Norwalk to apprehend the 2 rebel soldiers and transport them back to the prison located on the castle grounds. Norwalk was only an hour's ride away by horseback, so it wouldn't take long. He also ordered something to be done for the peasant family who lost their child, to protect them in case the rebels came back. They were to be relocated onto the property of the landowner for whom the peasant Martin worked. A royal guard was to be posted outside their residence at night for the following year. As compensation to the landowner, who was a kind man named Leon, King Charles sent him a gift of 50 gold coins, which was quite a generous bestowal indeed. King Charles also invited the landowner and his son to one of the royal banquets during the following week. One of the reasons King Charles felt so deeply about this peasant family's loss was that he had his own daughter. She was only a year older than the boy kidnapped by the rebels, and Charles loved her dearly. Just before she was born, Charles stayed up nights, hoping and dreaming about having a son to take over his throne. In the land of Astoria, there was a way of life for the past 200 years that had never changed. When the firstborn son or daughter of a king and queen reached the age of 16, he or she would become the new leader of the land. There were no exceptions to this rule. Being a man himself, King Charles thought a male could do a better job at handling the immense responsibilities, which is why he hoped for a boy. But it was a girl born on that night 2 years ago. A girl who would take over the throne as princess 14 years from now, which would probably go by like a blur. King Charles and his wife, Queen Delphine, gave the future princess the name Stasia. It was taken from the name of a princess who ruled the land over 100 years earlier. The royal history pages spoke highly of that princess, named Stasiana, from a long time ago. As Charles remembered it, the book even referred to her as one of the best rulers the land had ever known. That alone made it a fitting name for his firstborn, a girl with sparkling blue eyes and locks of blonde hair, at the tender age of 2. With all the trouble King Charles was dealing with on this day, he didn't have much time to take a break from his royal duties, and now it was late afternoon. The sun would be setting soon, and the rest of his evening would be taken up with dinner and entertainment from the court jesters and musicians. Excusing himself from his throne, he instructed his chief royal knight to stay at his post, but to get him in case of another emergency. The chief royal knight responded, "As you wish, your majesty. And where might I find you?" "I will be with Princess Stasia in the royal gardens, and then taking counsel with the queen." "Thank you, Chadwick," replied the king. The king appreciated Chadwick's years of loyal service, and knew he could be trusted to take care for matters while the king took a break. Chadwick was King Charles's younger brother, born 5 years after the king. The king admired the way Chadwick had taken on a new role over the past few years, of not just staying at the castle, but travelling the countryside to do good for others. Chadwick would sometimes leave for weeks at a time, but always came back with reports of how he helped those in need, while at the same time building up support for Charles's kingship. If only all the wealthy landowners and noblemen were as supportive as Chadwick, there would be no problems in the land, Charles felt. Walking through the doorway located behind his throne, Charles exited the throne room and entered a short hallway. It led him into a central room, which had 3 exits. To the right, one could walk out onto the castle terrace and look out at the vast castle grounds, which were mostly acres and acres of grassy fields. It was there that King Charles delivered his yearly speech to the wealthy landowners. He also watched the games held twice a year on the castle grounds from the same spot. The Asturian Games, as they were officially known, brought together all the greatest athletes from around the land. Continuing straight from inside the central room, one would enter another hallway leading to the king's chamber. That was where Charles and Delphine slept at night and took private counsel with one another. Nobody was allowed in that room except for the king and queen themselves, and those assigned to perform cleaning duties. At night, royal guards would be posted both in the central room and outside the king's chamber. King Charles did not take either of these 2 exits. Instead, he turned left and walked toward the royal gardens. The royal gardens were a special place, completely off-limits to the public, and even to most of the guards and castle staff. The gardens themselves were enclosed by 4 walls, with a door on 2 sides that led into different parts of the castle. Thus, amid the heavily protected castle, there was a private outdoor area. In this small area, there was a beautiful lawn containing flowers of every sort, which were brought in and planted from throughout the land. There was a pool of water in the middle of the lawn, continuously flowing by way of an underground spring which was diverted through here. As Charles walked out the door, a reddish-brown fish jumped out of the pool and came back down with a splash. Princess Stasia let out a scream of delight when she saw her father walking toward her. Stasia was sitting on the grass, while her floppy-eared rabbit named Mandy hopped around in circles. Her caretaker was there with her, Chadwick's wife, Delia. While Chadwick was given a lifelong assignment as Chief Royal Knight, Delia served as attendant to the Queen. When Stasia was born, Delia spent most of her days caring for the young princess-to-be, while Queen Delphine cared for her royal duties. "Look, Princess, it's your father." Delia leaned over and whispered in Stasia's ear as the king walked toward them. Stasia smiled widely as Delia looked up and told the king, "She's so happy to see you, Your Majesty. To what do we owe this precious visit?"
"We've had some tragic events in the land today, Delia. It seems the rebels are up to their old kidnapping ways once again. This time, it was a peasant family from the nearby village of Norwalk who lost their youngest son." King Charles reached down and picked up his daughter, kissed her on the cheek, and continued, "The rebels are getting more daring with their actions. I mean, Norwalk is only 1 hour away by horse. They are no doubt trying to send me a message." A look of concern flashed across the face of Delia upon hearing this. The king continued, "But the good news is, we captured 2 of the 3 rebels who were involved with the plot. 2 of my royal guards were posted there and managed to take them into custody, but not before the other rebel escaped with the child. I suppose the reason I'm sharing this with you, Delia, is it makes me realize I need to spend more time with my daughter. It's so easy for me to get sidetracked with the concerns of the kingdom. But this little girl is going to be princess in 14 years, and I must make more time for her."
Queen Delphine walked out of the other door, from a short distance beyond the pool, as the king was finishing up his account. "I heard about what happened, Charles," she said. "Is everything all right with Stasia?"
"Yes, my dear. She's perfectly fine. I just wanted to come and see her for a few minutes," Charles answered. Stasia was playfully trying to reach for Charles's crown, fascinated by the gold colour and sparkling jewels that lined it. Now, sweetheart," Charles said as he looked her in the eyes. "You're going to be wearing this soon enough." Charles handed the young girl back over to Delia and said, "It was good seeing you, Delia. Take good care of her, like you always do. We will see you at dinner time." Queen Delphine took Charles's hand, and the two walked back into the castle to discuss the events of the day further. For Delia, this was her favourite part of the entire day. She enjoyed being the primary caretaker of the young girl. Stasia had such radiance about her, a glow to her little face. The girl was fascinated by the world of small animals, insects, and flowers. It seemed she was happiest out here in the royal gardens, where the two spent much of each afternoon. Sadly, Delia carried with her a deep, dark secret she didn't want anybody to know about. While everyone else looked up to her husband, Chadwick, the chief royal knight, with admiration, Delia despised him. Behind closed doors, he was sometimes abusive to her. Delia couldn't understand why he mistreated her when she offered him nothing but love. During the day, Delia was free from his insulting behaviour, and she was even freer when he would leave on one of his week-long trips to promote the king, as he put it. Delia looked over and saw Stasia once again chasing her rabbit Mandy around the garden. The rabbit changed course and started hopping over toward the pond. "Stasia, don't get too close to the water," Delia reminded her. 2 hours later, as the sky was getting dark, there was a knock at the king's chamber. Charles and Delphine were sitting in there discussing the best course of action to clamp down on the rebels. A message was slipped under the door, and the king went over to pick it up. After reading it, the king looked over at his wife and said, "Ah, so it looks like our prisoners have arrived. Chadwick has notified me that they have been placed in the prison's holding cell. Perhaps now we'll be able to get some answers and discover where these rebels have been hiding. I'm going to go over there and talk to them myself after the evening banquet." At that moment, a trumpet could be heard throughout the castle, notifying all that it was time for the feast. "Speaking of the banquet, it sounds like it's time to go and dine with our guests," Charles added. With that, they both headed toward the grand banqueting hall. Charles and Delphine had been awaiting this particular banquet for some time. Tonight, they were hosting very special guests from the neighbouring land of Limekiln. They were being visited by King Dominic and Queen Bronna, who arrived earlier this morning with hundreds of Limekiln army troops surrounding them in protection. There was a special ceremony held to welcome them on their first visit to Astoria's castle to see King Charles and Queen Delphine after 5 years. They brought with them their 5-year-old boy, known as Rackley. Reflecting on tonight, King Charles was especially curious about one thing. The visiting king announced he had a proposal to share during the evening banquet. Apparently, it was a proposal that would bring many benefits to both lands for years to come. King Charles thought that perhaps King Dominic would suggest uniting their armies, or maybe he would want to initiate a building program to construct higher walls along the land's border. Whatever it was, King Charles was open to any suggestion to help make the land a safer place for the generation to come. Charles and Delphine paused for a moment as they reached the entrance to the grand banqueting hall. Right on cue, an attendant spoke loudly. "Attention, everyone! I present to you the King and Queen of Astoria." 3 musicians trumpeted their entrance, and the 50 guests who were sitting at 10 different circular tables all stood up at once. All eyes were focused on the king and queen as they walked to their seats at the head table and sat down. Shortly thereafter, the music stopped and all the other guests sat back down. Conversation ensued at each of the tables throughout the room. Sitting at the king's table, clockwise to the king, were Delphine, Stasia, in her special chair, Delia, Chadwick, 2 royal knights, Queen Bronna, King Dominic, their son Rackley, and 3 dignitaries who arrived with them. As everyone exchanged greetings, the table was swarmed with servers. The servers went around in a circle,
putting generous portions of food onto the golden plates and pouring the land's finest wine, Norwalk Red, into the golden drinking cups.
"I hope you enjoyed your afternoon,"
King Charles said to the other king.
"I'm sorry that I couldn't spend the day with you, but there was an emergency that developed. These rebels have been giving me quite a headache lately." "We totally understand," King Dominic responded. "After the ceremony, our delegation was taken out to the waterfall just beyond the castle. I must say, Astoria has some spectacular sights which are unmatched in the world. I think I can speak for all of us in saying we were in awe of the beauty." "Thank you for your kind words, my old friend. As you can imagine, I'm very interested in protecting the beauty of this land and making it a safer place for future generations. That's why your proposal captured my attention. Although, I must say, I'm not exactly sure what you're going to propose." "I didn't mean to be cryptic about my proposal," King Dominic explained. "I only wanted to wait until we were all gathered here at the table to share it with you. I'm sure you would all agree with me that it's in the best interest of both of our lands to work together in promoting peace and good relations with one another for the future. And sitting with us at the table is our future."
As he said these words, King Dominic pointed at the two young children, Rackley and Stasia. All the adults looked at the children, and the visiting king continued.
"I propose we form a marriage alliance involving our two children. When my young son has grown up and is known as Sir Rackley, Prince of Limekiln, he should be given in marriage to your daughter, who will by then be known as Princess Stasia. It will be a wedding the likes of which have never been seen before, uniting our lands and families forever."
There was a moment of silence following King Dominic's speech. It was short-lived, for King Charles stood up out of his seat and exclaimed,
"What a wonderful proposition! We accept this grand idea. Our daughter Stasia will be given to your son Rackley in marriage 1 year after she begins her reign as princess, when she is 17.
Upon hearing King Charles express his approval, all sitting at the table stood up and applauded. Those seated at the 9 other tables in the room all stopped eating and looked over at the king's table to see what the commotion was all about. Looking beyond his own table, at the other tables in the room, King Charles repeated what he said for all in the room to hear. With his booming voice, he proclaimed,
"Let it be known to all present that Princess Stasia and Sir Rackley will marry when she is 17 years old, 1 year after she becomes the leader of Astoria."
As he finished his words, thunderous applause filled the room. Delia hesitated before applauding, but then joined in. It seemed she was the only one in the room who wasn't sure about this new idea. A little while later, after the feast was finished, everyone moved from the banqueting hall over to the grand ballroom in anticipation of the evening's entertainment. Chadwick excused himself from the proceedings to head over to the prison and begin questioning the 2 rebel captives. The grand ballroom was the most magnificent place in the entire castle. The walls were lined with spectacular paintings made by the most famous artists of the era. There was a large stage area where performers would share music, dance, poetry, and other arts. At times, important speeches were given from the stage. It was even the place where new rulers were coronated at the age of 16. At the foot of the stage was a vast, polished wooden dance floor, primarily used for special events such as balls and masquerade parties. Tonight, as with most other nights, the floor was covered with seats made of fine wood and crimson cloth. The seats were divided into 2 sections, which stretched all the way to the back wall, with a walking path down the middle. Every night, when they were in use, all the seats were occupied by castle residents, dignitaries, and the wealthiest landowners. Waving to everyone as he walked in, King Charles and his entourage sat down in the seats at the front, and the entertainment began. The first act was an acrobatic juggler who impressed the crowd with every move. King Charles was watching, yet his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking back to what transpired in the banqueting hall. When the visiting king made his proposition, it truly was the last thing on earth Charles was expecting to hear. But it was simply brilliant. Charles looked over at his baby girl, who was sitting on Delia's lap, watching the juggler. The crowd applauded after the juggler made a tough catch behind his back. Seeing the reaction of the adults, Stasia slapped her small hands together to mimic their applause. Charles smiled, looked back at the juggler, and continued thinking about the long-term meaning of Stasia's future arranged marriage to Rackley. He wondered what the girl would think of marrying someone, not for love, but out of duty. He was sure she would understand, realizing it was in the best interests of her people, and she wouldn't hesitate to marry him. King Charles also reasoned she would grow to love Rackley over time, even if she didn't at first. But that was a long way off. There would be many years to prepare for this event. After all, they were both still young children. Stasia was 2 years old, and Rackley was 5. They needed to enjoy their youth and grow up first. Stasia had many years of royal training ahead of her before she turned 16 and became princess. Charles's thoughts wandered to the situation with the rebels. As the second and third acts unfolded, a violin player and a visiting poet from another land, Charles became restless. At the first intermission, Charles left the rest of the group and headed across the castle grounds toward the prison with 4 of his royal guards. He wanted to check in on the questioning and perhaps even ask a few questions himself. As he arrived at the prison and was about to walk down the steps that led to the front door, Chadwick came out. Climbing up the last step, he was slightly surprised to see the king.
"Your Majesty," Chadwick said to him, "I didn't expect to see you over here. You should be enjoying the evening's festivities over at the Grand Ballroom. Let me take care of the dirty work for you. I already finished questioning the rebels."
King Charles asked,
"Did you get anything out of them? Did you find out the location of the rebel camp?" "They weren't in much of a cooperative mood, it seems," answered Chadwick. "I pressed them hard for the past hour with threats, insults, and demands, but they wouldn't tell me anything except to say that terror will continue to fill the land. Really, Your Majesty, I wouldn't bother going in there. They are not going to tell you anything, at least not yet." "Thank you, Chadwick, but I'll decide that for myself."
The king walked past Chadwick and down the steps. One of his royal guards moved ahead of him briefly to open the door as King Charles walked into the underground prison. He had not been here in a long time. When he walked through the door, he almost choked on the stale air and musty scent of the place. The worst criminals of Astoria were kept here because it was one of the most secure prisons in the whole land. There were no windows, there was no natural sunlight, and absolutely no way to escape. Unlike other prisons, which sometimes opened the way for a prisoner to escape with help from the outside, there was no possibility of that here. High walls on each side surrounded Astoria Castle. On every one of the 4 corners, where the walls intersected, there was a lookout tower. Each of these towers was manned 24 hours a day, every day of the year. The main way into the castle was through the open drawbridge at the front entrance gate. The drawbridge was lowered from sunrise to sunset and was also lowered at other times as needed. There was no other way to gain access to the castle grounds, except for the small servants' entrance and bridge on the other side of the castle. Blocking any other approach was a deep moat that surrounded the castle, with hungry crocodiles living in the water. The fact was, no one had ever escaped from the underground prison on the castle grounds, and Charles suspected no one ever would. The king ordered the jailers to take him into the holding cell of the 2 rebel soldiers. As the last of the locked barred doors were opened, King Charles walked into the cell, flanked by his 4 royal guards. The rebel soldiers, hands bound and feet tied to a chain, were clearly shocked to see the King of Astoria enter their cell. They dared not say a word to him, knowing he held their fate in his hands. Charles lifted his left hand to scratch his beard and started to say,
"What you both did yesterday, what you've been involved with, is truly despicable. How could you possibly invade the home of a poor family and take away from them the most precious part of their lives? Don't either of you have families? I suppose not, or you wouldn't be involved in what the rebels are doing. Think for a moment about what it would have been like if this had happened to you. What if you were taken from your parents' homes in the middle of the night and brought into some cause you knew nothing about, away from your family and friends? Answer me."
The rebel soldier Trent dared to look up at the king and respond,
"Sire, I never knew my parents. They left me for dead when their food ran out and silver coins were gambled away. I'm only here today because one of the rebel leaders spotted me and took me into his own home. I owe everything to the rebels. And my mate here was fired a couple of years ago by the landowner he worked for when he was spotted eating a few grapes he had just picked. The rebels were the only ones who would take him in, as no one else would give him a job."
When he finished, the rebel soldier looked back down at his chains in embarrassment.
"If that's true," King Charles stated, "then now is the time to do the right thing. Help us track down and capture the rebels and their leader. We can make things right. You don't have to spend the rest of your days in this prison. If you help us, I will personally promise to set you free within 10 years. Think about it. It's a very generous offer, which I'm only going to extend to you just this once."
The rebel soldiers didn't say anything to this, so King Charles turned to walk out of the room. The king knew they would never accept his offer, but the king had his principles, and he wasn't going to break them. He did feel slightly sorry for them, if what the rebel soldier told him was true. There was no way he could commute their entire sentence in return for their help. It would have set a dangerous precedent throughout the land, allowing others to capitalize on it. No, justice demanded that they spend some time behind bars for the crimes they committed. If King Charles had to track down the rebels without them, then so be it. The next morning, it was time to bid farewell to King Dominic and Queen Bronna, and all those who came to Astoria Castle with them. After King Charles and Queen Delphine saw them off, they walked back through the castle and outside into the royal gardens. Delia was sitting on the grass in the morning sunshine, with her back propped up against a rock. A few feet away from her, shaded by a fruit tree, was Stasia, taking her morning nap. When Delia saw the king and queen, she extended a friendly greeting to them. The king responded,
"And good morning to you, Delia. I see you're enjoying the sun. It's certainly nice, considering the horrible storm that came through here 2 days ago. Listen, the Queen and I have decided to take Stasia out to the waterfall this morning for a picnic lunch. Would you care to join us, or would you prefer to take the rest of the morning off?"
Delia thought for a moment. It didn't take her long to make up her mind, because she enjoyed being with Stasia very much. Not only that, but it was a rare occasion when the king and queen took the morning off to do something fun. She said she would be glad to accompany them. Delia picked up Stasia, who opened her eyes briefly, but then fell back asleep. The four of them made their way out of the castle stables, which were divided into 2 sections. There were the royal stables, and there were the peasant stables. The king's group went to the royal stables, which held approximately 40 horses at any given time. The royal knights and guards used most of the horses housed in the stalls, as they fulfilled their castle protection duties or assignments in nearby areas. However, there was also a special section that housed the king's horses, 4 of them in particular. The royal stables were divided from the peasant stables by a large wall that could only be accessed through one door. That door was kept locked, with a royal guard always posted there to ensure that no peasants or other unscrupulous individuals made their way through. The peasants used their section to hold their horses as they worked at the castle. It was quite a prestigious privilege for a peasant to be able to work at any capacity at the royal castle. Mostly, Chadwick would hire young men and women from neighbouring villages such as Norwalk when help was needed. As King Charles, Queen Delphine, Delia and Stasia walked over toward the stables, a few of the horses started getting excited, and the noise they were making woke up a sleepy Stasia. The young girl was only 2 years old, but it was already clear how much she loved horses. A couple of months ago, the king and queen were returning home from staying at their estate in the countryside when they made a side trip to the village of Glaston and stopped at the vendors' market being held that day. Leaving their horse-drawn carriage, they walked through the market and created stunned silence as the locals stared in amazement at seeing the royal family. As Delia followed behind them, carrying Stasia, The young girl seemed to be particularly taken with a collection of small, hand-carved wooden toys that one vendor was selling. Stasia tried to reach for them, even though the toys were several feet away. Seeing this, the vendor called to Delia and offered to give the young girl one of the toys for free. Delia turned around and walked over to the table, telling Stasia, "Go ahead, he said you could have one of them." Stasia smiled and looked around at all the toys in front of her. What would she choose? There were hand-carved trees, people, carriages, fruits, flowers, night helmets, just about anything someone could imagine. The young girl's eyes lit up as she spotted a few hand-carved horses on the right side of the table. She smiled brightly as she picked up not just one, but two of them. Delia objected briefly, wanting Stasia to take only one, but the merchant insisted, saying it was his pleasure to provide a small gift for such a beautiful little girl. "The young princess thanks you, kind friend. May your good deeds come back to you," Delia told him, as they returned to following the king and queen through the market. Ever since that day, Stasia and her two toy horses had been inseparable. It seemed the only thing she loved even more was petting the real horses in the stables and riding on one of them with an adult. It wasn't long before the stable master had 3 horses ready, one for the king, one for the queen, and one for Delia and young Stasia. A contingent of 12 royal guards also mounted horses and followed right behind them as they rode toward the exit of the stable courtyard. Seeing the king and his family coming, the gatekeeper immediately pulled open the large doors of the courtyard, which opened into the west side of the immense castle grounds. The group rode their horses across the vast field of green grass and crossed the open drawbridge, which led to the outside world. As they proceeded toward the waterfall, which was only a short ride away, they passed a couple of peasants walking on the road to the castle and several startled deer. Stasia was able to enjoy the ride, since the horses were trotting and not galloping. She looked out at the oak trees and hills to her right, but her eyes kept coming back to her horse and the horses in front of her. At one point, the group passed a fork in the road, which went south to the village of Norwalk. There was a thick forest growing off in that direction, making the dirt road the most desirable way to get there. Eventually, the group took a short spur road, which led them to the picnic area by the river. After the royal guards checked the area to make sure it was safe, the king's group walked a short distance until the spectacular waterfall came into view. It was about 200 feet tall, with thousands of gallons of white water cascading over the cliff. "It's so beautiful, dear," Queen Delphine remarked to her husband. "What a wonderful idea to come here today. I don't suppose you were inspired to do this because of the enthusiasm of the visiting king and queen last night, were you?" King Charles laughed because she was right. The visitors last night were so impressed with this place that it made Charles want to come out for a visit. Despite its proximity to the castle, King Charles had not been out here in almost a year. He went over and took his daughter from Delia, walking a little closer to the falls. The young girl was watching the water with amazement. As they came closer, she turned her head away and kept wiping her eyes. The falls were creating a heavy mist because a tremendous amount of water was coming down. Stasia's face, hair, and light blue gown were getting drenched. A little while later, the group was seated on a blanket spread out across the ground near the river. They were safely out of range of the mist, but still close enough to enjoy the sights and sounds of the waterfall. Stasia was eating pieces of apple which were cut up for her, while the adults were eating fresh baked bread and cheese. The conversation drifted between thoughts on the beauty of the area, Stasia's future coronation and marriage, and the troubles brought on the land by the rebels. Regarding the latter, Delia asked the king, "Do you think the rebels could ever possibly threaten our safety at the castle?"
"Not right now," King Charles replied. "Perhaps in 10 years they may have the manpower, weapons and support to stage an attack on the castle. However, the reports we are currently receiving are of isolated cases of harassment. Essentially, The rebels are attempting to create an environment of fear for people to live in. If we can find their hideout and put a stop to them within the next few years, I don't see any long-term problems. I'm counting on Chadwick to live up to his title of Chief Royal Knight by tracking down the rebels and taking them into custody.
I'm sure he'll be able to do that, chimed in Queen Delphine. She glanced over at Stasia, who was picking some flowers at the edge of the blanket. When our daughter takes the throne in 14 years, we need to give her the best start we possibly can. Those first few years of ruling can be very tough. The last thing she needs to deal with is a group of people who have no respect for life or property. Hearing this, the king responded,
"Don't worry, that's a long time from now. I'm sure she is going to make a great princess, like her namesake from long ago, the admired Princess Stasiana. Our daughter will go down in the royal history pages as one of the greatest princesses Astoria has ever seen."
Charles had more to say, but he stopped talking when Stasia came walking up to her mum. The young girl was holding in her little hands a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked. There were probably 6 or 7 different coloured flowers, all mixed. With her hands full, she reached out with the flowers toward her mum and smiled. As she did this, Stasia said 2 simple words. "Here, Mummy." Her mum accepted the gift, but was left speechless. Water started to form under the Queen's eyes, and it wasn't because of mist from the nearby waterfall. She was overwhelmed with this precious gift from her adorable daughter. With the flowers now in her possession, the Queen hugged young Stasia. It was a treasured moment, the kind that a mother never forgets.